Brenda Brunel, and I represent SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priest. My location is Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Back in May, we invited people from across this country that clearly represent the true crisis in the church, that being the sexual abuse of children and adults by clergy. We have Indigenous representatives, we have non-Indigenous representatives. We have representatives from the East Coast and the West Coast. We have representatives of those abused as children and adults. We have representatives of those abused as males and those abused as females. We sent an open invitation, a letter to the Canadian Catholic body, themselves a charitable organization, asking to address the Assembly to provide a solution to the problem. We requested for them to fund a research database, to provide us a research database so we could have a full scope of the problem of clerical abuse in Canada. We were informed that each bishop governs their own diocese. There is no oversight. They are accountable only to themselves. We've yet to be invited to that assembly, and yet they know that we are here. We've been here all week. That speaks volumes to their intent and to their desire to end this crisis. We have traveled from all parts of Canada. We are still here. It's Thursday afternoon. None of our phones have rung to say, "Thank you. Come on in. We think you have value to add to our assembly, and we want to hear your voices." Instead, what they thought was important to talk about this week are missions, youth movement, yet they have only no enforceable guidelines and lack understanding of the depth of this crisis.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Boyle. I'm originally from Windsor, Ontario, living in Cambridge at the moment. It was 65 years ago this month that I suffered the first sexual abuse by one William Hod Marshall. It's been a horror in my life. It has affected many things, from straight financial to moral to straight comfort and ease and being a full participant in society. There's the litigation is not part of my agenda. That's long been dealt with. It was of little satisfaction to end that. What has not been taken care of is the cause, the church themselves. Marshall was witnessed assaulting me on several occasions, witnessed taking me out of a classroom, witnessed assault in a classroom, in a shower, and in his bedroom. There was enough of that. What we're looking for is accountability and peace to those survivors that have been waiting patiently for the church to act. They have a responsibility to us, they have a responsibility to humanity, and they have a responsibility to turn over the criminals they've been shielding for so many years. We hope to accomplish a little bit of leeway this week with the bishops, and we finally have a group representing across country, First Nations, and every age group. I'm 79 years old now. I was assaulted at 14. I hope to add to the group, and trust by the end of this week we'll see some light at the end of the tunnel. It's still pretty dark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marian Kelly. I am the Toronto. My speech is because I'm anxious. I would really like to see zero tolerance, but so far that is not happening.
Evelyn?
Hi, my name is Evelyn Corkmass. I am the Indigenous supporter of survivors or advocate. I went to St. Anne's Residential School, one of the horrific and notorious residential schools in Canada. And the government of Canada put its Indigenous people in residential schools. The residential schools took us away from our families, and we had no choice but to go to these residential schools. And it's partly, not partly, but it was a racial, racial discrimination to destroy our language, our traditions, our culture, and our spiritual beliefs. And I have been fighting this for many years, and I decided to join my non-indigenous friends to be stronger in our fight to make the clergy accountable for their actions throughout Canada. Thank you.
Evelyn, can I ask you, these institutions were sponsored by the church?
They were government funded by Canada, and they were run by the Catholic Church.
And why did they exist? Why did these institutions even exist? People will want to know that.
They existed because they thought that Native people or Indigenous people weren't civilized, and they wanted to make them like non-Indigenous peoples.
They wanted to try to civilize you in a certain way. And what happened when some of the stories that I'm familiar with, they treated you like you were, I'm going to use this word, and it pains me, but they used that word, savages, right?
Yes.
And what did they see in you that they thought was savage?
You'd have to ask them that.
Uh-huh. But so a couple of the things that I've heard this week in joining you is, putting your elbows on the table was a bad thing. And feeding you, they fed you, I think, rancid food, which how do you want to describe that? I don't want to speak for you.
There are so many issues in the indigenous world. We'd have to sit here for days and days and discuss it. So I'm here to specifically address the clergy abuse.
Okay. All right. And thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nancy Mayer. I have been a social worker for 33 years, specializing in working with traumatized people, adults, and adolescents. I specialize in working with folks who have been abused within the context of institutions, particularly within religious institutions. Any personal experience I have with this topic I can't speak about due to a gag order. I have been an advocate since the late 80s, and I think what disturbs me so much about this issue is that since the late 80s, over 3 decades, nothing has changed. Back then, we were asking for accountability, and it was explained to us the same way it was explained to us the other night when we met with the Catholic bishops, that every diocese is a kingdom unto itself, run by its own bishop. No bishop has authority over any other bishop, nor can they guarantee that the guidelines that the bishops together have agreed to will be enforced uniformly throughout this country. Catholic children are still not safe in Canada. Furthermore, when they enforce zero tolerance, which they do intermittently, and they ask for a Catholic priest to be laicized, many of these men go out needing to find employment, and they find employment usually in the helping professions. The bottom line is that the majority of people who come forward settle their cases with the church either civilly or privately, which means none of those cases are on the public record. And so when these priests are laicized and they go out, we don't know who they are. We don't stop them from working with children or with vulnerable people. Nothing has changed since our advocacy work in the late 80s. There seems to be no will, and it's time that Catholics and Canadian people held these bishops accountable and insisted they find the will to change and protect children and vulnerable adults. Thanks.
One of the questions that Americans are going to have, and nobody wants you to violate a gag order, okay? But in the Dallas Charter that was enacted in 2002 in America, the bishops of the United States said that they will no longer enforce any kind of gag orders against victims. Can you say anything about, I don't want you to reveal anything, but can you say anything about the nature of the gag order or how that is a dynamic in Canada?
To the best of my knowledge, the only diocese in Canada that has released the people victimized from gag orders has been the London Diocese. Other than that, throughout this country, it is at the whim of the bishops whether or not gag orders are enforced on the whistleblowers who come forward to report their abuse. And so again, a gag order can be not just on the amount of settlement, but also on the survivor's story themselves, once again silencing the person who was harmed.
And in the United States, sometimes victims want a gag order in terms of the amount of a settlement because they don't want family, friends, or the public to know what they have received. Okay, so gag orders can work both ways in that sense. But how do you see gag orders being implemented by Canadian bishops to silence victims such as yourself?
Well, if stories can't be told about what happened to a person, then people can't get the sense of what the problem is. The even gagging the amounts are really a business decision. If we give somebody $50,000, we don't want other survivors to know and ask for at least that much. And so there are various reasons to gag, but most concerning is that they gag the story of the survivor, once again taking away their voice.
Hi, I'm Leona Huggins. I'm a survivor advocate from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm a SNAP leader in Vancouver and an active member of ACCA Global. I was one of the 12 survivors that had the opportunity to sit with the bishops before the meeting of the Vatican Summit, the planning meeting of the Vatican Summit. And our time here in Cornwall hasn't felt much different than talking to the Vatican. Here we are talking to the bishops who, when I look at the list of bishops that were at the meeting, I have a little connection to, I know little bits of their story, because when you're baptized as a Catholic, the names of bishops are familiar, the names of local priests are familiar to you, and many of those priests that I knew as a Catholic school teacher or were names have now become bishops in this country. So there was a familial sense going into that meeting the other day. I had connections in some way, a way I could chat with them. And the meeting was very cordial. But what I want to say about the crisis in Canada is, like Nancy, I've been in on this a long time. I went to the police in 1990 with my story of abuse. And I went because I was a Catholic school teacher, and I was part of the team. I was part of the Catholic team. I had heard about what sexual abuse was. I understood that the priest that I had known and who abused me was a predator. I came to understand what predators were and how they operated in institutions, and I went to report it to the institution, trusting that the institution would do the right thing. And they had said all the right words, because in 1992 they published a document called From Pain to Hope. They said all the right things. They said they were going to fix this problem, but they fixed it in a different way. They fixed it by the fact for our US friends, Canada does not have a statute of limitations on these crimes. And the church has used that to their advantage. They've used it to say, okay, it's a crime, fair enough, and then we'll get into mediation with anyone that reports it. So I'm one of the people whose story is on record. My abuser's name was in the public record. He was found preaching on an altar in another town here in Ontario after having served time in jail. And one of the priests that I've got a picture of him on the altar with, the bishop that this man was on the altar with, he was in that meeting the other day, and all he could say to me was, McCann was already in the diocese before I arrived. So what he's saying is he's wiping his hands of it, saying the problem is not mine. So if anywhere in Canada there's a priest that's been reassigned and the bishop's moved in, he thinks it's not his problem. There could be, we don't know if there are priests out there. We do not know. And so we do not know because we don't have the research, we don't have the scope, we don't have the accountability. We don't know if children are safe. And my sense is they're not.
Leona, I just want to highlight this again for my people, my friends back home who are watching this, and I want them to hear from you again. I know you already just said it, but you're saying that your perpetrator was arrested and put in jail and returned to ministry. Do I have that right?
1992, I went through the criminal process. He pleaded guilty at trial. There were 2 women that the charges were about. We were young girls at the time. There were others who weren't able to come forward. He was sentenced. My understanding is he went to jail, and I felt that I'd done the right thing, that church leaders would ensure that he was never around. I can't fathom how you would put a man like that around children again. It was not until 2011 that I personally discovered that he'd been back in ministry almost from the time that he got out of jail. And yeah.
So again, if you're comfortable saying it, what is the name of your abuser?
John Edward McCann. Now we don't have to worry about him. He died last year. But
okay.
He died with a church funeral. The obituary states what an exemplary career. It says nothing about the harm that he caused himself, the harm that he caused to me, to the other victim, and the harm that he caused to my family, to the church community, and to the other church communities where he worked. And no one seems to care at a high level.
And I have seen the photo of that perpetrator, alleged perpetrator.
No, you don't have to say alleged.
Saying mass with, what are you comfortable saying the name of the bishop?
Archbishop Prendergast of he's the Archbishop of Ottawa and of Alexandria, Cornwall, where we are today. Currently
serving as Archbishop of Ottawa and Cornwall.
But you need to understand it was not his fault because he didn't know. This man was already in his diocese. Sorry for the sarcasm, but the man was already in the diocese, and so as a bishop, he doesn't see himself as having been responsible for that.
And fair enough, a lot of the filings in the United States on these issues suggest that the bishops either knew or should have known.
Known.
Amen.
I think you should know the background of the people that you're willing to stand on the altar with. I don't think that that's too hard.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Bob McCabe. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. My abuse took place in 1963 by Father Alphonse Robert, and I was living in Scarborough, Ontario, close to Toronto. Father Robert took me to with him on a trip to Montreal in the summer of 1963. We stopped in this very city that we're sitting in right now, Cornwall, Ontario, and my abuse took place there when he got a motel room and abused me throughout the course of the evening at that motel room. I was 11 years old at the time. I want to say that I'm incredibly honored to be sitting here with these incredible people, and it's through this that I honestly believe that we're going to make some inroads. You know, I concur with everything my colleagues have said here. I returned to Cornwall. I returned to the site of the abuse yesterday, and all these people were by my side. That is amazingly freeing. I've been to Notre Dame Basilica where I had to serve Mass for my abuser a couple hours after he was abusing me. It's hard to be respectful, but he asked me, do I want to have him hear my confession before I serve Mass? How arrogant. How arrogant. I'm angry. Brenda beautifully indicated that, is it a lack of understanding or is it a lack of initiative? Maybe we consider that it's a lack of care. It isn't good for the corporation of what we call the Catholic Church to do what is right to reach zero tolerance. Any business decisions are made at an upper level and at a management level or a COO level, but unless that's implemented at the various levels underneath it, it isn't going to work. And my understanding, based on what I'm hearing from incredible people who are present in and sat on committees with the cardinals in the Vatican and have left that, Marie Collins I'm speaking of, because no action was being taken. You know, I'm tired of sitting here and having to be understanding. I'm tired of having to be respectful of a group of individuals who are not respectful back to me, and I refuse to. I will respect the position, but certainly not the individuals. I've been able to come to a point where I do not believe that the church wants any change because it's not in their interest. Their actions don't match their words, and that comes right from the Vatican. We say zero tolerance, and then we say, well, we'll just move them to another parish. The silent shuffle. Let's confuse the situation enough that it won't be known. Let's intimidate them enough with security people. Let's intimidate them enough with the situation around them that they're going to go away. Well, we're not going away, and we've shown that this week. I'm humbled by the people I'm sitting with at this table and the number of years they've done this. I'll just speak finally to what Nancy was referring to in a gag order. I initiated legal action in 2013. I had it all resolved. We went through a trial in 2017. Everything was, agreed to or decided by a jury, and then they appeal it. So I went through another 1.5 to 2 years of trauma at the church's request because, they felt they were being so hard done by. And at the end, the Appeals Court of Ontario in March of this year came down with their decision in our favor. Nobody at any time indicated to me a gag order, so maybe the Archdiocese of Toronto doesn't have it. I don't know. Can only speak from my experience. And pray God you try to gag this guy. It isn't going to happen. How dare you? How dare you not allow us to sit with you in conversation? Let's see what happens tonight at the movie theater. That's That's all I got.
It's important that you feel the opportunity to speak your material to the public, and you have this crew supporting you in doing that, and you have the opportunity in your own way to speak your truth publicly. One of the questions that I think people have in Pennsylvania, and the people that I work with every day, and having been a priest myself, one of the things that we see again and again is a ritualized type of abuse. And I think you just made mention of the fact that was confession part of your abuse?
Confession wasn't part of my abuse. What I was referring to there, James, was the fact that after he abused me during the night in Cornwall and we drove to Montreal, before I said Mass in the Basilica of Notre Dame for him in Montreal, he asked me if I wanted to confess my sins to him. How dare he? That's
exactly what I'm asking. And isn't it ironic that the men who, beset themselves upon us at times asked, us to go to them to confess what they did wrong?
Yeah.
And is that not a type of ritualized abuse?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
If I may again, Jerry Boyle, for those that might think that when I spoke of as my abuser, William Hod Marshall, I wasn't the only victim of Marshall. He had victimized children in New York before he was thrown out of that seminary. He was brought in with open arms to the Basilians, where he went through the seminary here in Toronto, where he was assigned to St. Michael's School, where he abused children there. Upon reports there, they sent him down to Windsor, where I had the horrible experience of meeting him. And after one of his abuse, the same MO, he asked if I wanted to go to confession. No, I did not. I thought I was the only one, as we all always do at that age. To find out there was one that hinted at it that was in my class one of the times that Marshall took me out of there, referring to his sexual assault as a workout. And as I walked out the door, the young man said, "Going for a workout?" So he had been there. It wasn't until litigation came that I found out that there were another two people on the same basketball team that he went after. But he went from there, he went to Saskatchewan, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, St. Lucia. He bounced around. Every time he was reported, they move him, and that's the same sort of minimize, deny, and blame somebody else.
And isn't that interesting that that's the story, we hear that same story around the world. Yes. It's a global crisis. The same story that Jerry's telling, we heard in the movie that we were watching yesterday, By the Grace of God, that happened in France. We've heard it across this country from many people. Hod Marshall isn't even the only one. There are in the United States. Jerry's story is sounds very much the same. So Brenda, to you.
So, and thank you, Jerry. With that, what we were able to do is bring a very special documentary into Cornwall this evening, where we have invited all bishops to join us. And this documentary is a story of Jerry's abuse that he experienced at the hand of Hod Marshall. The documentary is entitled Pray, that's Prey, and it will be it's free of charge, and we invite anyone that is in the Cornwall area to come and join us along with the bishops at 7 p.m. and we will have a discussion panel following the documentary, and we encourage all to come. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
I just want to go back to Jerry for a minute, only because there are priests that I know who studied at St. Michael's in Toronto, who were Basilian priests. What is this order of St. Basil? Can you say a thing or two about that?
Nothing positive, because let's put, like, Marshall did plead guilty to 18 counts, and you know that that's not the number that came forward. I mean, that's not the true number. If 18 came forward, you can triple it to see the real number of victims. But it was three other bazillions that witnessed his actual sexual abuse of me. Two at least in the when I went into the shower and he walked in after me and abused me there. Two that walked into a classroom while he was abusing me. Another one with whoever, I couldn't quite see. I was a compromised position where my vision was blurred. Saw the bottom of the casket coming in, and the statement he made, he said, "I guess this room's busy, we better go somewhere else." That's bazillions. So I could never go to them for help. I didn't trust any of them. And when I finally did go outside the bazillions for help, I went into what used to be my parish and went into a confessional. The only place there'd be a screen, and I told them, the priest behind it, who I thought was other than the one, that I had an experience where a Catholic priest has touched impure parts of my body. What a horrible expression for a kid to use. So he said, "It's your fault. Stop doing what you're doing. It's all your fault. Don't do it again." So I ran out. And later into my 14th year, my abuse went on for 2 years. But later in the first year, and I have told the story before, I took rocks, threw them over the side of the bridge, and thought if I jumped over it would end in a matter of seconds. I was more afraid of going to hell than ending the hell on earth I was suffering. So that put it aside. I finally arranged to fail a grade so I could change schools.
Thank you.
I didn't got out of the pure hell I was living.
And Jerry, I want to thank you for sharing that, because my former spiritual director and confessor was, for a time, a bazillion priest who taught at St. Michael's and who studied at St. Michael's. And I think it's important that part of the story be told this week, because I know other victims today are watching this and watching you and concerned about that history. So I admire your courage, and I thank you for sharing that.
Hi, this is Evelyn again. On behalf of the Indigenous Canadians, I'd like to ask, and I have asked in public at the Bishop's meeting, for Pope Francis to come to Canada and apologize on behalf of the Catholic Church's genocide on our Indigenous people in Canada. The Catholic Church signed the Indian Residential School Resolution Agreement, it's called. Residential School Settlement Agreement, And in this settlement agreement, which I call a contract, they signed and said that they were going to give the Indigenous people $25 million for the healing of the damage that occurred in residential school. They have not paid this money to us. In our reserves across Canada, there's high addiction rates due to the abuse that was done to them in residential school, or done to us in residential school. So this is very important for us to receive, because we need to heal our community. I'd like the Church to create an independent Vatican Truth and Reconciliation Commission process to release to the public the global sexual abuse archives to be opened, so that we know who the abusers are, where they are, and we need to know the history behind, you know, why and how and the reasons why they relocate them rather than they flog them. And this would be very good for research purposes, for educational purposes, and to ensure the protection of children. You know, I have 2 grandchildren, and this is the reason why I'm doing this, you know. Not just for my grandchildren, but for the children of the world. No one has a right to take your childhood away, to take that spirit away, to take that innocence away. You know, these people need to be accountable for their actions. They can't go destroying children. And it is our duty as Canadian citizens, as parents, as grandparents, to not look the other way, because then we are just as guilty as these people committing these crimes. We need to stand together and get rid of this problem.
And I want to thank all of you, and I just have one question, and maybe we'll just go across the panel to ask this question. I was with some of you in Rome for the Papal Summit in February, and at that time, the clarion call was for zero tolerance of bishops who cover up these crimes. What is the status of that call? What is the status, to your minds, of Pope Francis's intention to apply zero tolerance to bishops who cover this up?
The idea is great. Nothing has been accomplished. They have a list. They have a list of all of the perpetrators, the accomplices, the aiders and abettors, and the reliably charged priest. We don't have that list. That should be public. It's a matter of enforcing the jurisdiction of our law.
I would really like zero tolerance, but that is not what is happening here.
Personally, I would prefer to see the actions of what zero tolerance in fact is, rather than hear these wonderful words that project false hope of what is actually taking place within this Catholic institution. More importantly, here in my country, Canada.
Zero tolerance has been mentioned several times in press conferences that we've done here and out of the country. For me, right now, it's just talk, and we're fed up. We need action now.
I think that the bishops in our meeting the other night reiterated to us they have no authority over each other. So whether the Pope is going to say, you know, we need to hold accountable the people who are covering up, they can't hold each other accountable. It's not going to happen in this country.
Zero tolerance means that a priest that was criminally abused and charged with abuse and went to jail would not be on an altar with a bishop. I'm told by that bishop that it wouldn't happen today, but that happened in 2011. So how does he know that it's different in any diocese? He might say that that's the truth in his diocese, but he doesn't know. He has no clue.
Zero tolerance is a lie. Zero tolerance is, what can I say to quieten you? What is it I can say to fundamentally shut you up? And I say that not only in the experience of what's been shared with my colleagues, but when I look at historical sexual abuse cases and when they go to trial, and then when they go to appeal, I in my own appeal and in the appeal of Rod McLeod on September the 6th in the Ontario Court of Appeal, the agents of the church, the lawyers, the insurance companies, wanted to retry it, demean and impugn the victim. That's not zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is if we don't have a need to appeal something decided by a jury, we don't appeal it unless we have judicial right. All of their actions in all aspects say, we're going to say this and it'll make you happy and you'll go away. We're not going away.
And I just want to thank this panel of courageous survivors here in Cornwall, Ontario, who are meeting for the annual plenary visit, the plenary meeting of the Canadian bishops, and the fact that they are speaking, even though the bishops of this country, this noble country, are not dealing substantially this week with the topic of clergy abuse. These victims, courageous men and women, are speaking on behalf of countless survivors all over the country and giving voice to our stories. I just want to thank them and thank all of you for paying attention to this video.
Thanks, James.
Good job, everybody. Very good job.